Hey, you. Yeah, you. I'm talking to you. The beginning dungeon master, the one who either has done maybe their first session or hasn't done a session quite yet. I'm talking to you. Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. I'm your host, Justin Lewis, and this is the show designed to help you improve your storytelling capabilities while you play D&D. And today's episode is going to be a quick one, frankly, because I'm a little sick and I don't feel like doing the much longer episode that I did have prepared. So this is a little bit more off the cuff, a little bit more raw. And as I said, this episode is primarily for the beginning dungeon masters. So if you're out there, and I guess let me preface this. On Instagram, whenever I get new followers, I try to send them a message asking about their biggest struggle as a dungeon master. And the ratio of beginning dungeon masters to longtime dungeon masters is very big. In fact, most people who respond to me they generally tell me that they haven't even done a session yet. And they're waiting for something or whatnot, right? So I wanted to do this episode because I think there's a chance that there's one or two of you out there at least that are waiting to do your first session for whatever thing, right? So this episode's for you. That's not to say this episode isn't for the rest of you because, as I always say, if you can get the fundamentals down, then you get to have a lot more fun. See what I did there? It's pretty good, right? Well, anyways. Okay, so these are 8 tips for beginner dungeon masters. Tip number 1 is stop waiting. What are you waiting for? Now, in my experience, people are either waiting to find players or they're waiting to have their story written based on all the conversations I've had. So if you're looking to find players, make sure to join our Discord or any of the Discords out there. There are tons, and you can find players virtually all over the world, right? You can really find players so easily, especially if you have a game store nearby. You can find local players. So it's really not... finding players is not as hard as you might think. I'd also just say... we actually have an episode on finding players. If you go back to episode 44, it'll show you how to find players much more easily. So all I got to say is tip number 1, stop waiting, right? This is your call to action. It's time to have your first session. Tip number 2 is you got to push past the learning curve. This is something I learned in a previous sales job by experience, but I've thought of this for a long time and I've really understood the theory behind this, but until you actually do it and see the effect in your life, you won't really understand it at the same level. So in my previous sales job, I was terrible at sales, right? And I took that job to leverage my way into a separate job. But in order to do that, I would have to be successful at that job, at the sales job. So I told myself I would put in the repetitions long enough that no one could fault me for not trying, but also theoretically, after enough attempts, you're going to start to get better. And so I put in many more calls than my colleagues, and as a result, after 3 months, I did see a very big improvement. I was actually one of the top people in our team, and I was able to move my way into the other job that I was actually focused on. So as a dungeon master, you need to understand that there is a learning curve. Now, obviously, this show is geared towards helping you shorten the learning curve, right? With experience from other people and specific tips and things like that. That said, nothing beats experience, your own experience. So if you can put in the repetitions, the more repetitions you have, the better it will be. You won't see the work manifest in results 1 session, 2 sessions, but months down the road, you're going to look back and be like, wow, I've come a long way. Number 3 is start where you are, right? You don't need to know everything. You don't need to do everything, but start where you are. The best example of this, and I've heard this numerous places, but Caden, one of our co-hosts, he first got into D&D on a road trip, right? The driver of the car took them through a scenario where they didn't have dice, they didn't have anything. They just had him describing the story, right? And that was enough. That was enough for them to enjoy the experience and to play and to have fun. And actually, that driver of the car is Jake Packham, who is the dungeon master for our other show, The Pact and Boon, for our actual play show. So you start where you are. It doesn't matter where you are because you're going to move from where you are and you're going to get to different places. You obviously have good taste. I mean, you listen to How to Be a Better DM, after all. We thank you so much for your support. And if you've ever gotten anything useful from How to Be a Better DM, take a minute and rate us and review us on your podcast listening app of choice. It goes a very long way to helping our show help many more dungeon masters out there who are just like you. If you love our content, help others become better dungeon masters too. When setting any scene, it's imperative that you tap into the 5 senses. When it comes to sound, one of the best ways to do that is with music, ambiance, and sound effects. And that's why we've teamed up with Monument Studios. Monument Studios provides easy-to-use soundboards perfect for dungeon mastering in any setting. If you want to see this in action, go to fantasy-plus.com and get 10% off of your first month when you get their Fantasy Plus app by using the code BETTERDM at checkout. Again, that's fantasy-plus.com and BETTERDM at checkout. Use music to amplify your gameplay. Spoiler alert, we are building an army. That's right. We're building an army of amazing dungeon masters who want to make the world of D&D a better place. If you want to join our army and fight by our side against the evil forces of boredom and bad DMing, join our Discord and lend your voice to the cause. Go to sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and join for free today. That's sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and enlist in the fight against boredom. This is important because if you're thinking about wanting to do XYZ story and you want it to be this specific way, absolutely try and make it that way, but don't hold yourself back by what you don't know. Instead, focus on what you do know. And actually, that's tip number 4, which is focus on your strengths and or focus on finding your strengths. So as a dungeon master, you're going to be good at some things naturally just because of who you are as a person, because a lot of skills we develop transfer to D&D and vice versa. So spend a lot of time trying to figure out what your skills are and then spend a lot of time using those skills to great effect. Now, that's not to say you don't improve on your weaknesses, but when you're starting out, you want to give the best performance possible, and that's going to happen by focusing on your strengths. A classic example, right? Jake and Caden again. So Jake isn't so much for minis and stuff like that. He loves the minis, but he's not like others you might see. Caden, on the other hand, he paints the minis and they look astounding. They're just so good. So each of them focus on their strengths, right? Jake focuses more on gripping story rather than specific minis, whereas Caden, he does put in the time for minis because he is good at that. So if you can figure out what your strengths are, use that to your advantage. Tip number 5 is don't stop. Keep going, right? You're going to have some bad experiences. You're going to hit roadblocks. You're going to have some TPKs or have incidents where your party just dissolves. Someone in the party's not going to have a good experience and they're going to say you're not a good DM. You're going to have bad experiences. Just don't stop, because that is the quickest way at making sure you never get better and you never have those amazing experiences that make being a dungeon master worth it. So just don't stop. Tip number 6 is focus on player engagement. Because you're new and you don't necessarily know all the mechanics, you don't necessarily know all the tips, tricks, and techniques for building out the most amazing story. And frankly, I don't know if anyone's there quite yet, right? That's the lifelong pursuit. But if you focus on player engagement, then at least everyone at the table will feel like it's the best session ever, right? And the way you do that is you focus on what is inherently interesting to each player and yourself. The more people just naturally think something is cool, the better the experience will be, even if it wasn't as polished as you wanted it to be. Number 7, same kind of thing. Do what feels fun and cool to your players, but also to you, right? If you're having writer's block, it's very likely that whatever you're doing right now feels kind of boring. So change things up and do something that feels a little bit cooler, right? Do something that you're naturally going to think about because thinking about it is fun. And last tip, number 8, be real with your players. And the best example I can think of right now is from the High Rollers Erois campaign. You guys know I'm a big fan of the High Rollers Erois campaign. I'm making my way through that right now so I can then move on to their next campaign, Althea. And actually, side note, if anyone has any sort of connections to Mark Hulmes, the DM over there, or any of the players, I'd love to bring them on the podcast. So if you do have some sort of connection there, definitely let me know and connect us. But anyways, so in one part, they go to their version of the Feywild, right? And they're traveling through this swamp. And the swamp has fluctuating water levels, so it makes for very interesting travel because the party makes this raft, but the raft is only as useful as there is water, and the water recedes about every 4 hours or so, give or take. At one part, Mark clearly says, "You guys, I don't actually know how long it takes to row a raft through a swamp, so you're gonna have to bear with me, right? Like this is what we're doing right now. Just don't look too deep into it." I thought that was an excellent example of the DM, kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit, but not to reveal too much, but instead saying, hey, this isn't entirely realistic or accurate, and that's okay because we're still going to have fun. I don't know the exact mechanics of how to create and paddle a raft through a swamp that recedes in water every 4 hours. I don't know what the mechanics are for, I don't know how long it would take you to travel 25 miles walking in like ankle deep mud and then having to get on your raft and paddle that, right? Like that is a great example of the DM being real. So as a beginning dungeon master, feel free to explain to your players, hey guys, I know that this thing might not be anatomically correct, right? If you're using injury rules or something like that, you can say, yeah, you have a bleeding wound. Obviously, this isn't anatomically correct because, you'd probably deal with it a little bit differently, but this is how we're going to play, and hopefully it's fun for you guys, right? So with that, these are the 8 tips for beginner dungeon masters. Number 1 is stop waiting. Number 2 is push past your learning curve. Number 3 is start where you are. Number 4 is focus on your strengths and finding your strengths. Number 6 is don't stop. Number 7 is focus on player engagement. And number 8, no, I got that wrong. Number 5 is don't stop. Number 6 is focus on player engagement. Number 7 is do what feels fun and cool. And number 8 is be real with your players. I wish I would have thought of these when I first started out as a dungeon master. When you start out, you have so many expectations, and you quickly realize that your expectations do not match reality. But let me reassure you that your experiences playing D&D can be just as good as your expectations and better in some ways. So I guess maybe that's a bonus tip. Don't have as many expectations for sure, but enjoy the ride. And hopefully as you go along and you become the world's greatest dungeon master, because chances are one of you out there is getting near to that. But as you do become the greatest dungeon master, hopefully you'll think of us and reach out to us when you have particularly good experiences, because we always love to hear that and be a part of your journey. So, dungeon master, beginner dungeon master, last thing I got to say is reiterate tip number 1. What are you waiting for? Go have your first or next session and use these tips to improve the experience. We'll be back next week with another handcrafted episode just for you. And until then, let's go ahead and roll initiative. Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.